I love bourbon, but I'm not ready to restart my career and be a distiller. I have a bachelor's degree, and I want to continue to use those skills in the whiskey industry. So check this out. The University of Louisville now has an online distilled spirits business certificate that focuses on the business side of the spirits industry, like finance, marketing, and operations. This is perfect for anyone looking for more professional development. And if you ever want to get your MBA, the certificate credits transfer into U of L's new online MBA program. Learn more about this online program at business.louisville.edu/online spirits.
You got the king right there, brother.
If you want some of that, make sure you crack it open now because it's not open.
Oh, I feel that.
Is that yours?
Yeah, I brought it.
Yeah, open it.
I feel like it always costs Kenny $1,000.
Yeah, open that bottle.
Every time it comes over, I lose $1,000. Hey everybody, this is episode 211 of Bourbon Pursuit. I'm one of your hosts, Kenny, and let's go through a little bit of the news. Woodford Reserve has announced the release of its newest permanent expression, the Woodford Reserve Kentucky Straight Wheat Whiskey, with wheat as its dominant grain at 52%, followed by 20% malt, 20% corn, and 8% rye. This whiskey was created by master distiller Chris Morris. And Morris said that Woodford Reserve now has all four whiskeys as a part of its permanent family of brands. You have Woodford Bourbon, Woodford Rye, Woodford Malt, and now Woodford Wheat. The Woodford Reserve Wheat is 90.4 proof with a suggested retail price of $34.99 for a 750 ml. That's quite the segue into our guest today, but we'll save that here for a minute. It was just a few weeks ago, we talked about the Supreme Court ruling that lifted the ban on out-of-state retailers in the state of Tennessee that could potentially affect shipping across the nation. Well, I think we're about to start witnessing the start of the domino effect. A Louisville attorney recently filed a lawsuit in federal district court against Kentucky Governor Matt Bevin, Kentucky Attorney General Andy Beshear, and the executive director of the Alcohol Beverage Control, Norman Arflak. This complaint argues that the law is unconstitutional because, as we've said before, it violates the Commerce Clause of the United States Constitution because, by quote, it discriminates against out-of-state wine retailers engaged in interstate commerce. It also argues that it violates the Privileges and Immunities Clause of Article 4, Section 2 of the United States Constitution because it denies non-resident wine merchants the privilege of engaging in their occupation in Kentucky on the terms of equivalent, those given to the citizens of Kentucky. And that's all according to this lawsuit. We are going to continue to pay very close attention to see how this plays out in other states in the upcoming few months. On Monday this week, we got to take a trip over to Cox's Creek with a few of our Patreon community members and select 2 barrels of Four Roses. The team came together and selected a 9-year, 6-month OBSF and a 10-year, 6-month OESK. We're really looking forward to getting these barrels out to our community sometime in September. We also selected a New Riff barrel once again. You know, if you want to see more about all the perks that are offered by supporting this podcast, like going with us on barrel selections, please do us a favor. Go to patreon.com/Bourbon Pursuit and get more information. Now, if we rewind the clocks back to around February of 2018, all the fellas from the Bourbon Community Roundtable, we met up in Frankfort, Kentucky to select a barrel of Buffalo Trace. What happened next with that said barrel is the next part of this story. When you have a used bourbon barrel, you want to repurpose it. And what better way to do that than letting it age with some delicious Imperial Stout? We teamed up with Third Turn Brewing and did just that. We aged a stout at 12.2% ABV and let it rest in that barrel for an entire year. And now, it's time to release it. On Friday, July 26th from 4 to 7 p.m., Ryan and we will be at Third Turn Brewing located in J-Town in Louisville, Kentucky. And we want to share a pint with you. Please come on out and try this beer on tap. And if you really like it, you can take home a crowler for yourself to take home. We hope to see you out there. More information about that can be found on our Facebook page under the events section. Now, today's podcast was recorded a while ago when we were on site at Down One Bourbon Bar in Louisville, Kentucky. So if it sounds like we're recording in a bar, well, it's because we were. However, Chris Morris and Elizabeth McCall, they're no strangers to the show, and we're excited to have them back on once again. But this time, we're excited to hear them talk about the job of Master Distiller and how that title is earned through years of service, and really how Brown-Forman is now laying the foundation for Elizabeth to take over when Chris is ready to retire. We also talk about the barrels that they have in their own cooperage, the char, and this week's Whiskey Quickie that aired on Tuesday, the King of Kentucky. All right, you've heard me talk long enough, so let's hear from Joe over at Barrel Bourbon, and then you've got Fred Minnick with Above the Char.
Hi, this is Joe Beatrice from Barrel Craft Spirits. I work with a team that takes blending seriously. We spend months obsessing over hundreds of combinations until we figure out the perfect blend for you. You can find it on the shelves at your nearest retail store.
I'm Fred Minnick, and this is Above the Char. Every week, I ask listeners to send me an idea for Above the Char. I get so many, but the one request I get most of all is what do I think of rapid aging? This is the process that new distillers or chemists use to try and make bourbon faster. And I want to tell you, this has been going on for a very, very long time. In technology, they like to seek solutions for problems. And the fact is, making bourbon's biggest problem is the fact that making it right and making it tasty can take anywhere from 4 to 15 years. So if you're a businessman or woman and you want to make some money, it sure looks good if you can make a 6-month-old bourbon taste like it's 15 years old. Now, a little history behind this. The Romans actually employed rapid aging techniques in wine, and in spirits, the mid-19th century, we saw incredible amounts of people attempt rapid aging technology. In 1867, a French man used a rotable wooden paddle to agitate barrels like a butter churn. Using a similar concept, the 1871 U.S. patented Pfeiffer and Richards apparatus placed barrels on roller slats in a heated room and agitated the barrels back and forth. The inventors claimed that this ripened whiskey within a few weeks. Several others hit the market in the 1870s, to include a heat and motion device that offered practical value and utility. We'd also see ultrasonic radiations enter in the 1930s, and the Germans would do things like raise the ester content up to 120% in wine distillates. They also used ultrasound technology. By the 1960s, rapid aging fell out of fashion. It was not considered very satisfying. In fact, you would see distillers openly speak out against this. Today, we have seen the rise of smaller barrels claiming that it's aged faster. We've seen people play heavy bass music to make the whiskey come out quicker. There's been chemical reactions. There have been agitators, very similar to, mixing a paint can. There's been all these efforts to make whiskey faster. And I've tasted almost all of them. They all lack a certain depth, a certain mouthfeel, a certain flavor that makes you want to buy it. In fact, I'd say the thing that we should really look at here, is there a problem with whiskey? And the fact is there is not. The problem is in the making money of whiskey. So as long as somebody could make money trying to figure out a solution to getting good whiskey to your doorstep, we will always see rapid aging technology. And I will always give it a shot. But I have yet to taste one that is better than even some of the worst craft distilled whiskeys. Rapid aging technology doesn't add anything to the quality of the whiskey, at least from what I've tasted. Instead, it strips out a lot of character, and it doesn't have the time that's really required to be a good or great bourbon. So what's the old saying? If it's not broke, don't fix it. And let's face it, bourbon's not broken. And that's this week's Above the Char. Hey, if you have an idea for Above the Char, hit me up on Twitter or Instagram. That's at Fred Minnick. Again, at Fred Minnick. Until next week, cheers.
Welcome back to another episode of A Bourbon Pursuit, the first of the live podcast we're doing here at Down One Bourbon Bar in Louisville, Kentucky. Fred, Ryan, and Kenny back here once again. And this is a new home. This is actually going to be pretty fun because Ryan and I had a tasting here last week when we did this, but this is going to be a new adventure, bringing in a guest.
Yes, I'm looking around and I'm remembering our first time we record a podcast. It was in my basement, and it was just me and you and a laptop, and there was nobody there. And now there's like 15 people around us watching. There's all these lights. We got master distillers here. There's reserve tables, even though they're not for us, but people thought they were.
We're gonna act like they're reserved.
It's
for us.
kind of crazy, you know.
It really is. And Fred, this is how many times have you been to Down One? It's a pretty awesome
Many times.
bar.
I actually been here so often that I got my own cot back there in the closet if things get too far. But this has been a fun bar to kind of see it develop. There's been a lot of talent from Louisville kind of come from here and go on to be brand ambassadors for distilleries and go on to other opportunities. But this for me is one of the places where I come in and I assess talent for things that I'm doing, and they do a great job here. And of course they're connected to the Galt House. They're part of the Galt House family, and so it never hurts from a purchasing opportunity, for a bar to have that kind of purchasing power to be connected to someone like the Galt House. So they get a lot of good things that a lot of smaller bars don't.
And
Hold on, I want to know about this scouting report, of talent. Are you like an NBA scout? Going around.
Well, as you know, Kenny and Ryan, I do a lot of festivals, and I'm also on a lot of education committees for cocktail conferences.
Okay, that makes
I
sense.
try to do things. I try to create content for live festivals, and I usually have to tap into bartenders. And bartenders have to, in my opinion, from a career perspective, they are a lot like an NBA player.
Yeah.
And some people come in are really great for 2 years and then they're gone. Some people come in and they're great
one and
for
done.
10
that's
years.
the one and done's the cocktail world.
It's true. It's true. Bartending talent is something that, from an education perspective, you have to scout. You have to find the people that will, put on good seminars and can actually make a daiquiri and a Negroni and an old fashioned and a Manhattan. They serve the great Chris Morris the right way, and don't give him the cocktail. Give him the right cocktail that he asked for versus the one
Wait,
he
a
didn't.
daiquiri's not a frozen concoction
It's amazing.
that Jimmy Buffett sings
But
about?
the daiquiri actually was not meant to be a blended concoction, although
What?
it's turned
But I
into
do
that.
love the blended
I
concoction.
thought it was supposed to come in
when
a
I'm on
plastic
vacation.
bottle, and you put in a margarita or a blender and
Shake it up,
Yeah.
and it's ready to drink. But
All right, Kenny's head's about to explode.
we gotta move
on to the guest.
Yeah, why are we talking about
know.
daiquiris?
Let's talk about-
Kenny, Chris, as you may know, our friend Kenny here, he's a little
He's a little tight.
upset with Ryan and I. this year.
we gotta take him off the
Type A.
guardrails sometimes and bring him. We gotta bring him back in and
Rein it
focus. But that's really what we're talking about today. Is not cocktails, but we are talking about bourbon, and most importantly, we're talking about Woodford Reserve. So today we have Chris Morris, the master distiller at Woodford Reserve, and Elizabeth McCall, the assistant master distiller at Woodford Reserve. And both of these people are alumni of the show. I believe it was back in the episode 40s and episode 60s when you two had made your appearance. So welcome back on.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us back.
Glad to have you back.
Yeah, and to kind of get this kicked off a little bit, Elizabeth, I kind of want you to kind of give people another recreation of really what your role has progressed to since the last time you were on, because you were in the lab, you were the head taster, I believe, and now you're assistant master distiller. So what's that
I'm
look
trying to
like?
think back. When we go back in time, as Chris's wonderfully made Manhattan made its way to him. So when I last was speaking to you all, it was master taster and senior quality control specialist at Woodford Reserve, working production part of the time, and the other part of the time was working with Chris on innovation and, of course, tasting batches and all of that. And it's shifted to more focus on really getting in the weeds of trying to understand how Chris's mind works, which
Hold on, wait. Have you figured that out?
I have not figured out yet. He's kind of...
Chris, do you know how your mind works?
I respond to emails as genius. Yeah. Brilliant. I do. He's being very embarrassed, but I really do, because I won't ever be able to understand fully how his mind works and how he puts batches together and how he pulls in history and actual where is the market going. I mean, all of that is very interesting, but I try to learn as much as I can. So I'm trying to just follow in his footsteps and learn that, and that's just spending as much time with him as possible. He gives me projects, and he's like, here the other day I'm like, okay, how do you build a new grain recipe? And he handed me the book of corn, and he's like, I read this on a trip. Like one
That's a
trip,
thing? Like
one
the
trip.
Book of Corn?
Yeah, it has
Like it's-
all their
like
stories.
It's like a Bible.
Heritage.
Like a textbook on corn.
Yeah,
There's a book on corn.
there's a book on corn, and I mean that's the kind of things
It's
that Chris
called
Morse does when he thinks there's a
The
lot
Corn
of
Book.
conscious thought.
It's amazing, Kenny, but actually authors write things. So, yeah, there's a book on corn.
Let me know when it turns into an audiobook, and then I'll
You get it on Audible.
or the movie version,
Yeah.
maybe? No. So, go ahead.
No, but that's a lot of what I mean. Trying to learn that, and then of course still learning in the production side of things. You'll never know everything. I still have a lot of learning to do in terms of getting my hands dirty at the cooperage and at other distilleries outside of Woodford Reserve. And then education. I work with Chris and the team of other master distillers at Brown-Forman on educating our sales force and distributor folks on the whiskey category. So there's just lots of things, nuances that go into it.
I got a question for you
Expanding.
too. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt,
No,
but
go-
like, so does a master distiller, or just do each different distillers have different styles or methods, or is it more like plug and play, or like what is Chris's style and what's yours, or like how are they different or same, or?
Well, certainly in my experience, we see differences. We were talking with Fred before we stepped in this afternoon that each company has its own criteria for the job. There's no uniform, what is a master distiller, what is a distiller. It varies from company to company. And we're, of course, very proud to be the oldest spirits company in America, the Brown-Forman parent company. So we think we know what we're doing, and I am the 7th in the history of the company, and Elizabeth is working her way to number 8. But we have criteria that differ from other companies, but you do see a difference in style and interpretation. Of course, everybody knows my mentor, my first boss in my whole life was Lincoln Henderson, and I'm very different than Lincoln. In fact, my palate is different than Lincoln. Near the end of his career, we would have arguments because I was tasting things he didn't taste, and he would get upset. Sorry, that's the way it was, because we know as people age, their sense of taste deteriorates. So a younger person will have a better sense of taste. I know that.
Are you trying to say that you already kind of like see your inevitable coming? Is that what's happening, and you're trying to groom her to do that?
Well, that's part of the process. One of my key roles today is to develop Elizabeth to succeed me. So that's part of our Brown-Forman process, passing on the mantle from generation to generation so that nothing changes. Wink, wink, things will change because Elizabeth is not Chris.
Yeah.
I wasn't Lincoln.
But we got a ways before we see that change, right, Chris?
Yes.
I hope so.
Yes.
But not that I don't want Elizabeth to,
I hope so too.
to be there.
I have a lot to learn.
But we're having such a good time together, and we got our new master taster over here, Katie, joining us tonight. But that's just, if you're making 100% natural product, Woodford Reserve is corn, rye, barley, or many whiskeys. It's limestone water, it's yeast, it's exposure to copper, and maturation in an oak barrel. It's as natural as you can get. And as you put those batches together based on your perception of our standard, it will evolve. Because again, we're all individuals. And I think that's one reason people will love a brand like Woodford Reserve. It is our collaborative interpretation of this product. And again, it will change. But the changes are subtle, the changes are evolutionary. But the bottom line is it's a real product that somebody or some persons, a team, are putting together. It's not artificial, it's not manufactured, it's not a committee in some corporate office. It's real.
Yeah. So is that like training manual? Is that something you do, or is that something that Brown Foreman has? Like here's how we
master
want it done, and
distiller
Chris is
manual?
like,
Yeah,
no,
this
this
is
is how it
manual,
should be
yeah,
done.
yeah.
Like, so how
Well,
does that kind of work in that process?
flip
It's a
page
book on
86.
tape, Brian.
Yeah.
It's an Audible book. Of course.
I had produced for me or developed for me that manual before it didn't exist, and when I was coming up, it was a guidepost for me. It was sort of tailored to me, and that was back in 2000, 19 years ago, and I've taken that original work as we've evolved and developed, and I've tweaked it, and now Brown Foreman does have a professional development guide for master distiller, which means assistant master distiller. We have a professional guide for master taster that both Elizabeth and of course Katie have gone through, courses of instruction, experiences.
Let's take a
Stuff
look
they
at all
have
that
to
right
do.
now. Like, so you just talked about like all these manuals you have and all this effort that you put into the terms and titles of master distiller, master taster, assistant master distiller. When I can just go right down the street and get a diploma from a Moonshine University and then come out and start my own distillery, or heck, I don't even have to go there. I can start a distillery tomorrow and say I'm a master distiller.
You can watch some YouTube channels.
I can watch a
you know.
YouTube channel and say I'm a master distiller.
And the old Ascot brand takes off from there.
That's right. What?
Elizabeth's shaking her head.
What in the world is happening to American whiskey right now where you have one company who's going through all this effort for the titles of distiller, and then you have some random schmo wherever in the USA saying that they're a master distiller and they haven't done a lick of distilling? What's going on?
Yeah, Elizabeth, I kind of want to get your take on that one
Well,
because
I'll-
you've been trying to groom yourself for this role and you've been really putting years of effort into it. So
Yes, so I only have 10 years in this industry, and which some people are like, oh my gosh, that's a long time.
At Brown
And then
Foreman, that's not long.
At Brown Foreman, that's
Just
nothing.
a baby.
And in this industry, in my opinion, that's not, I don't feel it's a long time. And I am very, very much, very proud. And I think you hear it when I talk about Chris is going nowhere, I hope, anytime soon. Because I have a lot of pride in the fact that I'm assistant. And that implies a great deal of learning I still have to do. And the respect I have for the title of Master Distiller. If they were to tell me tomorrow you're going to be Master Distiller, I would have serious issues with being called that, especially for a brand like Woodford Reserve or any of our Brown Foreman brands that have so much weight behind them. It's just a title to me that I look to and I think of somebody like Chris Morris, who is it has lived and breathed bourbon and whiskey his entire life, and it's not just about running stills. Anybody can learn that skill. You really can.
You think
We
anybody
have-
can run a still?
If you have the right manuals and you go out and you spend time training, now you can't just walk in off the street and do this. No. But can you learn? Anybody can learn how to do that. A lot of people can learn. Maybe not anybody.
I think there's a lot of people in backwoods that have stills in the in the forest,
But,
right?
but
Some
I'm
of
just
my,
saying that
relatives.
you can learn how to do these skills. But there's time and thought and experience that goes into something that really makes you want to believe that your product, like what Chris Morris, I mean, what he's done for Woodford Reserve is unreal. Like, you look at we sit down and we talk about things and we talk about brand planning. He introduced, was he there for the start of the actual bourbon? No, he was with a different company at the time. But when he came in, we have rye, we have our Masters collection that came out, you have our malt, you have wheat that's coming out soon. And that's not all out of just willy-nilly, this would be fun. It's a lot of it is well thought out when you look at history and when you look at what's the plan. We talk about flavor with Woodford. And I mean, that's his genius and experience in the industry that led him to that path and that guided vision for a brand. And that takes nothing but time. I mean, time is something I think is so
So I hear what you're saying there, like with with branding and everything like that, I think we don't know as a society, when I say society, I mean bourbon society, what a master distiller is. So, Chris, I'll bring that to you. What is a master distiller? Because it meant something in the 1800s and the 1950s. It means something different today. What is a master distiller?
Well, of course, there is no criteria in terms of industry. There's no set of requirements. As I mentioned earlier, it varies from company to company, and I believe, Brown-Forman believes, number one, you're responsible for the overall quality of the product that your name is associated with, the distillery you're associated with. And as Elizabeth said, that means a whole lot. If you're our colleague Jeff Arnett at Jack Daniels, you're the master distiller of Jack Daniels. That's sort of important. Woodford Reserve, my gosh, Old Forester, those are important brands, not only to our company, but to the history of our industry. So there's a lot of gravitas there. There's a lot of responsibility. And also I think it means your brands that you have helped create and develop have won awards, are recognized as good brands. You're a master of what? You're a master of a brand that is acknowledged to be of the utmost quality. If you haven't won an award, I don't know how you can be a master yet. But again, that's our opinion, not a global opinion of any degree. So again,
but I think it's a nice baseline. I mean, Kenny, wouldn't you agree that it's at least a baseline for what is a master distiller? You have to have won an award when you have so many.
I don't know.
out.
I mean, you kind of take the anti part of that, right? I know that you're a judge at San Francisco, and then you've got the other group of bourbon enthusiasts out there that say, don't take that as gospel, right? You take that as a way that you can start learning about a spirit or anything like that, but when you see gold or double gold.
Well, in fairness, I wasn't thinking about San Francisco when I posed you that question.
Yeah.
I was thinking of like best bourbon at San Francisco, or
I mean,
I
the
wasn't
other way,
thinking
you
about
could-
one of the three medals there. I think that's what Chris was thinking too.
Or I could just pay off the Forbes writer that I know.
Yeah.
To write it. No.
Cannot happen. Can't happen.
let me add, maybe as a close to this, or we continue, but that's one thing Brown-Forman and the Kentucky Distillers Association, because this was a subject of discussion years ago with the membership, and we don't think any one company or organization can define or impose any restrictions on the rest of the industry. As Fred said, if a little startup distillery wants to call its whatever person master distiller, that's up to them. That's fine. Brown-Forman is not going to say you can't do that. It's not our job to impose upon the industry our opinions. This is America. We don't do that. So I think the bottom line is our brand speaks for itself.
Does it taste good?
Yeah.
Are you making a good product?
Yeah.
Does it taste good?
I
Simple
think
as
that
that.
I think that's fair for the professional side, but now we're starting to see like this growth within like the bar community, and everybody saying they're an expert about whiskey, and and Kenny brought up the judging competitions and what is best. There was just a gas station whiskey that won world's best whiskey, and I seriously question how that won, and I'm a judge on a lot of those things, and I know like people have to pay entry to get in that, so there could have been like a low point of entry. Might not have been a lot of it. Well, Chris, what do you think about like this rise of so-called experts that are tasting things and putting their names on things
And hosting podcasts.
But hey, full disclosure, we always say, and we are
You
not
two
the
have
experts.
never ever named a whiskey of the year. You two have never done anything like that. So, like now we're in a situation where there are 1,500 different, whiskey sommeliers or experts or whatever, and they're not coming from the ilk of Brown-Forman, and you may even think that I'm that too. But I'm curious as to what your thought is in terms of like the people who are taste and consider the tasters of the community.
I would just be curious to know. I mean, for me, like, we're tasting and we want to know quality. Do you know what are all the defects you can find in bourbon whiskey distillate? And when you find them, like, can you describe, like, well, what do they taste like? What are those defects? Where did they come from in the production process? How do you troubleshoot and work around that and get through all of that? And I guess
Is it important to know how to fix it, or is it just important to spot it as a taster?
Okay, as a taster, you probably don't have to know that. If you're going to be a master distiller, you have to know how to do that.
But a taster can't fix it because it's already there.
Yeah, you're tasting it at the end of the, it's already out there.
It's too late.
I guess, but you could talk about, but if you're a taster, you should know, I don't know. I mean, well, does this, if it's in new make, does it stay in new make? What happens to that defect? Does it age out? Is it something that, and so if you're tasting something at new make and then you're tasting something that's a finished product or maturing, how do you troubleshoot it on that end? If you don't know where it comes from in the production process, I don't know. I don't. Those things are important, I guess, because of my background and where I come from.
That's an interesting question. Or you talked about how if it'll push through the age and kind of improve. How much does that like experience like with Chris or you like? You know that like what are some of those notes I guess that you're like?
Well, that's
this is going to eventually work itself out.
Yeah, that's where experience helps.
Yeah.
But sometimes you're surprised, either positively or negatively. But that's an interesting point that everybody's bringing up. How has this person, this expert, been trained? As Elizabeth said, we're professionally trained. We're trained. We have PhDs on staff for professionals in the sensory science. Elizabeth is a sensory scientist as her beginnings at Brown-Forman. We have sensory science consultants come and test us and work with us. So and these just aren't whiskey sensory scientists. They work for food, aroma only, like perfume companies. These are experts in sensory science. And so it surprises me and sometimes alarms me when we taste a whiskey and we note defects and a person critiquing that whiskey is just singing its praises. And you're like, there's these obvious defects in the whiskey. And this person either doesn't understand them, doesn't recognize them.
And that's what they want in their whiskey.
Or they like defects. And so things become more complicated, Fred, when I won't say when I started in the industry because there was nothing like this in the industry.
Yeah.
But when early books, Gary and Marty Regan and Waymack and Harris and the legendary Michael Jackson are starting to write about whiskey when nobody was writing about whiskey, it was a very tight sorority and fraternity of whiskey writers, and everybody knew each other. And there weren't that many whiskeys. There were a handful of bourbons, a handful of this and that. There was nothing that we see today, pre-micro distillery movement. And pretty much everybody was on the same page. You understood what you're talking about.
Right.
And as bourbon and rye and whiskeys have become popular and everybody jumps on, which is fun, again, it sort of dilutes the level of expertise. And I think today people can be self-styled experts, but what is their base? So again, we leave that to the consumer to decide. Mm-hmm. Somebody says something good about a brand, a glass of whiskey, try it. If you like it, good for you. If you don't, learn from it. So we can't impose upon the entire industry our views. Again, we just have to hope people pay attention to Woodford Reserve and what we're doing and go from there.
So I kind of want to educate some of the listeners and the watchers out there because, you've talked about, and both of you have talked about trying to find defects, and whether it's in new make or whether it's in aging whiskey. And, today we brought these, I'm going to put words in Elizabeth's mouth here. We brought our Bourbon Pursuit Copitas because last time we had talked, you said that Copitas were sort of the way that you like to use in the tasting room to kind of get the most flavors out of them because of the tulip shape and stuff like that. But I kind of want to pick your brain a little bit. What if there's somebody that's at home and they're listening, and they want to try to understand what flavors to pull and what are those possible defects that they're buying or they're finding. No, of course, it's not going to be in a Woodford Reserve or
It's
Brown
not going to
Forman
be
product.
in this double oaked.
But
Never.
it's definitely not going to be in this. But however, they're going to go and they're going to find some random bottle they never heard about, and they're going to buy it and they're going to taste it and be like, "Oh, what is this?" So what are those some of those flavors, those notes that you really think are the biggest defects that any good master distiller should be able to find?
And before Elizabeth jumps in, again, we're looking at two sides of the coin. The first 4 sources of flavor, which is our mantra of the 5 sources. What does the water, the grain, the fermentation, and distillation bring to the palate? So that's our new make, our new spirit. So we judge that. So it has a set of criteria. And we're looking, of course, you never look for good things because you assume the good things are there. So we do look for defects. And at that point, it's too late, unless there's a certain defect. We're saying, forget this. But we want to know that defect is there as we barrel and then adjust as we go forward. But we use those defects and then go back into the distillery and say, something's not working here, let's fix it, because...
Where do you go to first to fix it? Where do you like? This is
Depends
probably
on the
mostly the
defect. Depends on
guaranteed
the
way
defect.
it's going to
Depends on
be.
the
Reverse engineering part of it. What's that like?
You go to grain, you go to fermentation, or you go to distillation.
Yep.
One of the three. The water's going to be solid, and then we go into the wood, go into the barrel for maturation, and then of course 6, 7, 8 years later, there could be different defects because now the wood character has come into play. So it depends on where we are that we're looking for certain defects. Because as Elizabeth said, some of the new make defects can be overcome by maturation. They're still there, you just don't note them because the wood has taken lead role. But you don't want them there in the first place. So we now have 2 places to adjust. New make means we adjust the distillery, but what's there can't be adjusted. But we can do that on a week basis. Years later, we adjust by batching barrels together. So we can fix what we have in front of us except for one defect, which is unfixable, and go forward from there. So batching becomes very important. You know, a couple of barrels of this with 98 barrels of that are going to be okay. We don't like that, but it's
Depending on the
Depending
defect.
on the defect, the right
There's one bad apple makes them all bad. There's the one defect that
You can't hide it.
We can't hide,
Yeah.
and it's
And what is that?
That's must.
Must.
Musty
Gotcha.
character,
Musty
dirty
must.
That's right.
basement.
Jackie told us that.
We probably got a little bit of that going on with all this rain right now. A lot of must probably going in those non-heat cycle
Yeah.
warehouses.
Yeah.
or if you have a leaky roof.
Or if
True
like
that.
I
want to switch gears a little bit for a second. Brown Forman is such a dominant American whiskey company. And in the last, I'd say 10 years, there's been such a dynamic effort to pull in malts, to try and do not necessarily a single malt, but some kind of malt mash or the 5 malt release from a few years ago. And I know your passion. You have so much passion for single malt scotches. You have a real craving for those, and sometimes Chris. But are we going to see a stronger effort from Brown Forman on the American single malt category that's just taking off? And I know we've had some releases of late, but are we going to see more of that?
Yes, I'll let Elizabeth talk about our particular product, but yes, I'm a big fan of single malt Scotch. If that upsets anyone, I'm sorry.
He's not really sorry, folks.
But and of course, Brown Forman owns 3 single malt Scotch distilleries, which Elizabeth and I visited back in July. That we're just so proud of that. But I am the only Kentucky bourbon distiller who's a keeper of the Quake. I'm the only Kentucky bourbon distiller who's been honored by the Scotch Whisky Association, which I'm very proud of. So Scotch whiskey, of course, is our ancestor. The bourbon tradition is the evolution of Scotch whiskey, evolving in Kentucky in the 1770s through the 1850s. based on our environment. So we love that touchstone of Scotland and Ireland is where our tradition comes from. But we released a master's collection, as this group knows, and maybe many of the listeners do not know. We released a master's collection duo many years ago that was 100% single malt, or 100% malt, I should say. That was our distiller's malt. It wasn't peated, it wasn't smoked. It was the same malt we make our Woodford Reserve bourbon with. And we distilled that 100% malt fermentation and entered half of the volume produced and used Woodford Reserve barrels, so they had held Woodford Reserve bourbon one time. And then we barreled the other half of the volume we produced in new Woodford Reserve barrels. And that became seasoned malt and new cask malt. Some silly name, I can't remember what we called it, because we didn't want to call it single malt. Because at that time, if you said single malt, and probably to this day, if you say single malt, people immediately go
It has a connotation.
to Scotch
What about
whiskey.
solo malt?
Yeah.
You know, some
Solo malt.
Yeah.
And
Change up the verbiage.
un malt.
and they weren't
Uno's malt.
they weren't very popular because
I remember some of those, like there was one, it was classic malt, right?
thank you for remembering
Yeah, it was
the
classic
names.
malt.
Yes,
Right.
And there was classic malt and there was straight malt. I can't remember which one I liked more,
he has a good memory.
So, yeah,
but
the
I liked
classic
one
was
of them more than
used
the
in-
other.
Classic was
I
used.
bet you liked I liked the straight malt. New Cooperage.
It might have been, but I've always and I wrote this in one of my reviews, and I have to tell you, Chris, I've always appreciated the fact that if I've ever been critical of your stuff, you've never taken me to dinner and yelled at me for an hour. Like some people
I've
have.
never taken him to dinner.
Yeah.
Done that too?
But on one of them, I was just like, what? And what in that review set, the one that I didn't care as much for, I said, I wish they would do more focus on bourbon. And the thing is that you all are such brilliant bourbon distillers. I wonder why it is that there's such a fascination for making malts work.
Okay. Well, so the malts came out, and of course, 10 years ago, who was buying bottles of Woodford Reserve Masters Collection? Bourbon drinkers. And bourbon drinkers don't drink scotch, by and large. And so it didn't go over very well. And I could understand that. They wanted bourbon. They wanted seasoned oak finish. They wanted Sonoma-Cutrer Chardonnay finish. They wanted sweet mash. And we...
Forwood, don't forget Forwood.
And we sort of let them down, which is the way it goes. But we learned a lot in terms of the process of making malt-heavy whiskey. And in my bottom line learning was, going back to our earlier conversation of taste, these are sort of boring. These are sort of boring. 100% malt. Again, we don't have the smoky, the peaty characteristics of some of the European malts or Japanese malt. And we're not aging for 20, 30, 40 years. And we don't have pork pipes and sherry butts. It was all American oak. And they were sort of boring. That doesn't mean that they didn't taste good, but they were sort of boring. And that learning leads to our new release of last year, Kentucky Straight Malt Whiskey, which is a permanent member of our family. It will be coming back this late spring, early summer. And it's a member of the family. So, Elizabeth...
Has it been doing well?
Oh yeah.
Yeah?
It's been doing really well. We released it last June, and it all sold out right away. I mean, people were like 6 months later, like, are you making more? Like, what's the deal? And Chris and I get approached like, well, how could we make this get to the shelves a little quicker? Could we adjust something with our process or our quality? Now we're like, nope, can't do that. But we humored them and we put it.
That's
through
happened a little bit in the last.
Oh, there's
6
a
months,
lot of
if you will.
pressure for that because
Like 1910 from Old Forester.
there's a
kinda
lot of
kidding.
pressure because people really like. We put out good products at Brown Forman, if you didn't know. And people get excited about it. But, the job of a master distiller, is to say no. I mean, Chris's name is on that bottle. So, at
True.
the end of the day,
Yep.
It's when things go wrong, they're like, Chris, that was, he's the one who has to talk about it. And so with the malt, it was very popular. We did a Kentucky straight malt whiskey, and we fought for it to stay at the process where we released it at, and because the taste, even a year makes, that there's a time difference with aging. You've got to let it go to what it should be. And
I got a question. Don't interrupt, just because I'm clueless about malts and I assume you're making these malts. Are you doing them in the copper still or column still or?
Yeah, it's both.
In both, okay.
It's both. It is if we're going to produce something and put it under the Distillers Select, Woodford Reserve Distillers Select bourbon, rye, malt, wheat that's coming out soon is always going to be that batching of column and pot still, because that's
So
what
the
makes it.
column from Shively, and then the pots from Versailles.
That's yep.
Because we were tasting some Kings County I was talking about, and it's a 80% corn, 20% malted barley, and we thought we were tasting like younger notes, and their distiller said, "Hey, that's not younger notes. That's our pot still, and it's creating like some different buttery, farmy, kind of funky flavors." And so
they're still figuring it out.
Yeah, and so I was curious to get your take on that. Like,
funky's not one of our technical
No, we don't say funky, but
okay, no, I was just curious.
But no, I think that I wasn't around at the beginning of starting our pot stills, but from those that I've spoken to, figuring out how to run your pot stills is a challenge. We have gotten to a point with Woodford Reserve, we've got it figured out. Done all the hard work over the years to figure it out. But the notes you get from a pot still are big, bold, oily notes. You see the grain come through more. Chris, if you wanted to add, there's a distinct difference between the two types of distillers.
Funk is something we normally use in rum, like in Jamaica. But you don't use it very often in whiskey.
Yeah.
But if you're gonna, it's probably coming from a pot still.
Yeah.
You
Like
gotta
a
know
low
how to work
distillation
them.
level pot still.
But here's a fun bit of our story, and Elizabeth will tell you about our recipe. Is one thing that I've drawn on from inspiration is the history and heritage of our industry in Kentucky, and certainly Brown-Forman's history and heritage, and started research on malting, malt whiskey in the history of Kentucky. And one thing, Brown-Forman has a tremendous archive, again, from the oldest spirits company in America, 149-ish years old right now. We've got a wonderful archive which is housed at the Fraser History Museum, and we have a complete set of the wine and spirits journals from the 19th and early 20th century, much less our own documents. And we find that there were malt whiskeys made in Kentucky before Prohibition. Brown-Forman had a brand called Marrow Malt, Marrow. And when you look at the old Sanborn maps, which are diagrams, schematics of distilleries for insurance purposes, you'll see these at the University of Kentucky, at the Filson, their University of Louisville, and of course in our collection. We see that the original Brown-Forman distillery had a malt floor and a malt kiln. We were a Scottish distillery in the 19th century, and that's incredible. And that in the history of our state, the first malt house, and remember, we don't have a malt house in Kentucky any longer. The first malting operation in Kentucky, 1785, before we were Kentucky, is in Woodford County. So I thought, what better provenance than a Brown-Forman brand made in Woodford County to be what is now the only Kentucky straight malt whiskey on the market. Our Woodford Reserve malt is the only one of its kind.
Very cool.
That may be true, but folks crave the bourbon, and as they did back then,
It all comes back to bourbon.
They crave the bourbon.
Hey, it's Kenny here, and I want to tell you about an event that's happening on Saturday, August 24th, because I want to see you in historic downtown Frankfort, Kentucky at Bourbon on the Banks. It's the Commonwealth's premier bourbon tasting and awards festival. There's live music and over 100 vendors of food, beer, wine, and of course, bourbon. But guess what? Even we'll be there in the Bourbon Pursuit booth. You can check out all the events, including tastings with the master distillers that you've heard on the show before, and the People's Choice Award for the best bourbon out there. You can get your all-inclusive ticket for $65, plus you can join on the free Friday night event. Go and check it out, bourbononthebanks.org. You've probably heard of finishing beer using whiskey barrels, but a Michigan distillery is doing the opposite. They're using beer barrels to finish their whiskey. New Holland Spirits claims to be the first distillery to stout a whiskey. The folks at Rack House Whiskey Club heard that claim and had to visit the banks of Lake Michigan to check it out. It all began when New Holland Brewing launched in '97. Their Dragon's Milk beer is America's #1 selling bourbon barrel-aged stout. In 2005, they applied their expertise from brewing and began distilling. A beer barrel finished whiskey began production in 2012, and Rack House Whiskey Club is featuring it in their next box. The barrels come from Tennessee, get filled with Dragon's Milk beer twice, the mature bourbon is finished in those very same barrels. Rack House Whiskey Club is a Whiskey of the Month club on a mission to uncover the best flavors and stories from craft distillers across the U.S. Along with 2 bottles of hard-to-find whiskey, Rack House's boxes are full of cool merchandise that they ship out every 2 months to members in over 40 states. Go to rackhousewhiskeyclub.com to check it out and try a bottle of Beer Barrel Bourbon and Beer Barrel Rye. Use code PURSUIT for $25 off your first box.
That may be true, but folks crave the bourbon, and as they did back then,
It all comes back to bourbon.
They crave the bourbon.
Yeah.
You know, it's
Well,
hard for malts to stand out.
No,
think,
I
but,
agree with that. But so Woodford Reserve is the home of innovative whiskeys. First and foremost, like that's the big thing for us is that we have our distillery, we have the ability to be flexible and to play with grain.
I'm sorry,
recipes
but
to
hold
play
on,
with
folks. Let's just have a moment for
King of
Kentucky. Damn, this is
snuck some.
good.
It's
Yeah.
delicious.
It is so good.
Chris Morris again. His name's on the.
This is probably
he
my
had to
my
hand
7th
sign
bottle
every
taste.
single one of those labels too.
And every one of these is like, oh man, it's just like a trip down like Great Whiskey Row. Holy shitballs!
Yes.
I'm glad I could bring that.
Kenny,
Man.
at least you let me open it with some good guests.
There
instead of
is
just
so
me.
there are so
Normally I just open
many
You
these
didn't have to
bottles with
drink it
just me.
alone.
complicated notes
Yeah.
in this. I don't even.
Yes.
And this was one of my top whiskeys of the year last year.
yes,
And
thank
you
you.
know, the craziest thing is I went into like a blind competition. This was like my front runner to win it. But you know how blind tastings go. You just never know how it's going to go. But
Yeah,
this
they
is
can surprise you.
It's so good.
Thank you.
It's so good. Kenny,
I'm
what
gonna
do
get
you
us
think
back.
about
I'm gonna
this?
get us back on the rails here. Is what we're gonna
Where
do
have we
here, okay?
gone?
Because he kind of interrupted her because she was kind of talking a
I'm
little
sorry.
bit
I
about.
apologize.
You just got
Do the malt
excited.
recipe.
Because-
How bourbon like it is.
Well, because
Way to go, Fred.
She started going down.
Hey,
the
I
path.
love bourbon. What can I say?
Yeah.
Is
That's
it wrong?
fine. Yeah,
Well,
as
no,
he's drinking a beer.
But so what I was saying is that we're the home of innovative whiskeys, and so we do a lot of really fun things. And you know, with our malt whiskey, we are 51% malt, 47% corn, and just 2% rye. So we're right close to that bourbon requirement. You know, with 47% corn, you know, we're
It's
really
the gateway malt.
It
you
is
know?
a gateway malt. But the thing is that yes, it's a gateway malt, but who really knows, you know, what is American malt at this point in time? We're still defining what that really means. It's not
Well, what was the marrow malt, or do you know the recipe of that?
He could probably
Was that in your
find it.
corn book?
No.
Pick up a glass of Woodford.
Okay.
So what is
Very cool.
American malt? There's
So-
actually an incredible debate about that. And I think the
Exactly.
greatest malt producer in this country is Lance Winters from St. George. Mm-hmm. He's been making American malt, you know, since the 90s or thereabouts, legally.
But it's not a category. I mean, to your point, like it's not a category. It's not something that people are really seeking out. So why do we produce these things? If bourbon is Woodford's big thing, why are we producing malt? Why are we introducing wheat? We're
Yeah.
introducing
Why-
wheat.
why
this
are you
summer.
introducing
Why
these
are we
things?
doing this? Makes no sense. We are flexing the muscle of the fact that Woodford Reserve is the home of innovative whiskeys, and we can play in flavor. It's all about flavor. So you look at our Woodford Reserve Distiller Select product, and it's balanced and complex. You can find 212 flavors in a glass of Woodford Reserve bourbon. But
Name them all. No, I'm kidding.
Start with the A's.
Alphabetical order, go.
But then you get into
Acetyl, acetaldehyde. Oh, there we go. Sorry,
No.
we'll start with the A's. Okay.
but then you look at and everything is done with purpose. I told you earlier, Chris Morris is a genius when it comes to bourbon and understanding it. And when we're planning out Woodford Reserve, it's not just all willy-nilly like, oh, wouldn't it be fun to do a malt? How cool. Nobody else is doing it. Let's do that. No, it is thought out because you look at, we got our Distiller Select Bourbon, which hits all 5 areas of flavor. Then you have our Double Oaked, which came out in 2012. It's sweet aromatic forward. It hits that we want you to know, we want you to taste sweet aromatics. Then we've got our rye, which is spice forward. We're trying to hit that area of flavor. Then you've got our malt, which is those grain wood notes coming through. And then with our wheat, we'll complete it with our fruit forward notes. But then also, going back to 1939, when they established, the TTB established, what are the 4 types of American whiskey? Bourbon, rye, malt, wheat. We're hitting all of those. So not only are we covering flavor, but we're also looking at it from a historical standpoint as well.
Yep.
And you're doing a lot of the
Purpose.
experimentation that hopefully bourbon geeks are really trying to harness in on, because you do it, you know, you have the standard, you've got your double oak, but then you also have your Distiller Select series, right?
Mm-hmm.
These sort of one-offs that people really they gravitate towards because it's something new, it's something unique. What's been the latest one that has come out that sort of garnered some attention?
Well, the latest one is our good old favorite.
What, double oaked? Okay.
Double.
I didn't know how many doubles were on now.
Double. It's just double. It's double oaked, but aged for, instead of the 12-month, 24 months. But man, I mean, it shifts the flavor profile completely from our double oaked, and people are obsessed with this.
I was gonna say, how many when you start taking over, how many doubles are going to be on this?
Well, I just want to interject here. Like there was, I got my, Chris, you know the story. I had my wisdom teeth taken out one year, and
I like where this is going.
I could not, for like 3 months, I couldn't taste anything. The only thing that I could taste from that I could assess was double oak and double oak, and it is one. I think barrel finishing is the hardest thing to do in American whiskey right now, to put out like a really good product, because you can screw it up so easily. And what they have done with double oak and double oak.
Yeah, I was going to say, we're getting tongue-tied over
It
here.
is so hard to do. And I am sure you guys went through a lot of batches to get that flavor right. But my God, does it feel like a dessert on the palate?
Oh,
does it feel like dessert?
Well, thank you, Fred. Now, to Fred's point, barrel finishing has been around for quite a long time. Give Dr. Bill Lumsden, who I'm very familiar with, at Glenmorangie as the modern father of barrel finishing back in the early 90s. But when all of us, because we've finished Woodford Reserve, as you all know, in our Master's Collection, in Sonoma-Cutrer Chardonnay barrels and Pinot Noir barrels. We didn't make those barrels. They were used before at Sonoma-Cutrer. Finishes are typically completed in barrels that came from somebody else and have been used before. So in the development of double oaked, we have created the first and only whiskey in the world finished in a barrel made specifically for it, by it. Having our own Brown-Forman cooperage has allowed us to make a second barrel, brand new, charred on the inside, to finish Woodford Reserve specifically in. That took 2 years to develop, and we take fully mature Woodford, finish it in the second barrel for up to a year, as Elizabeth said, and we have double oaked. It's the only whiskey in the world, Scotch, Irish, Japanese, you name it, the only whiskey in the world that has been in 2 barrels, the original and the finished barrel, that were both new, made for it by its own cooperage. That's unique. And as Elizabeth said, we're in that second barrel for approximately 1 year for the Woodford Reserve double oaked. Double, we go 2 years, and the flavor changes.
But it's the same barrel for 2 years.
Yes, you don't leave the barrel.
Yep.
It's that.
I think there's a misconception that
Yes.
there's 2 barrels.
Yes.
No.
And then we have gone 3 years. We have gone 4 years. And is it treble double? Is it quadruple double? What we're going to call it? But we have decided that flavor profile gets a little too intense, a little too far afield from what we want. And we have decided that double is as far as we go.
Chris,
So we continue to experiment.
you may have said this, and I apologize if you did. I was distracted because somebody had a question online, and like I was like trying to get it over here, but somebody was asking, is there 2 different type of char levels on each barrel?
Yes. So
You didn't say it, did you?
No.
he didn't
Great.
say it.
All right, sweet.
So you're going to hear it right now.
But that's also what makes it so great, and the fact that we have our own cooperage, so we can build our own barrels. I always jokingly call it couture barreling because we're making barrels specifically for each brand. And so with double oaks, we start out, we have our Woodford Reserve Distiller Select barrel, which is going to be a 9-month seasoning. We do a 10-minute toast and a 25-second char on that barrel. Then that's aged 5 to 7 years. Then we go into our double oaked barrel. The double oaked barrel has the 9-month seasoning, a 40-minute toast, and a 5 to 10-second char. So we're flash charring, as we like to call it. But what we're doing is a long toasting process, which gets into the lignin layer of the wood, which is where a lot of the vanillin lives. So when you nose double oaked, you get those
The
buttery
vanillin? What's vanillin?
Vanillin.
Vanillin.
Vanillin. Okay,
Vanillin,
sorry.
vanilla, sorry.
No, that's okay. I'm an
mumble.
idiot. That's why I ask questions.
So that's kind of where you get all those really, really sweet aromatic notes, and you're gonna find that with double oaked, you get the color too. So it's really getting.
So
the color.
Elizabeth, you and Chris, this is going to be exciting conversation, probably just for the 2 of us here on this.
We'll start one over here.
But,
So how you doing, Elizabeth? No,
We'll just chat. the 3 of us.
but you talked about how you're the only distillery that has their own cooperage.
Oh yeah, of our size. If you want to go there.
Well, no, I mean
Elizabeth's on our side.
Yeah, you
keep
guys
her
have your
over here.
conversation over there.
So that story starts in like the 1940s when there's a lot of these acquisitions going on from the larger parent companies of the time, National, Shinley, Seagram's, a lot of these kind of companies. Brown-Forman, instead of those companies were out there acquiring distilleries that could not meet the mandates for making alcohol for the war effort. Instead of chasing that carrot, instead of chasing those distillers to buy independent distillers, they were purchasing cooperages. And when they did that, they kind of got themselves lumped in.
150 years we're going on. Brown-Forman.
It was like one of these brilliant business moves in the 40s and 50s, and then they later acquired a little company called Jack Daniels.
Yep.
So there's like all this
So smart.
unique business acumen within Brown-Forman, and I always like when I hear you all talk about like we're the only distillery that has our own cooperage. I think of the guy who was in a boardroom
Who thought of that?
in the 1940s. Is like, hey, why are we going after distilleries when we can get what everybody needs, and that's the barrel?
Fred, that's a good point. I've never really heard that story, and I don't know if anybody knows it, Chris would know that story of. Just because that's probably like the Woodford Reserve story when the bourbon's dying. It's like, hey, we want to buy a bourbon distillery and start a new brand. And people are like, are you crazy? So I'm sure it's the same kind of thought with our cooperage.
Well, Fred was certainly pointing in the right direction. So coming out of the Second World War, the big distilleries, the big companies, I should say, who had many distilleries, Shinley, Seagram's, National, Glenmore, and others, had their own cooperages, all in Louisville or the Louisville region, and they were making their own barrels. And that meant barrels were hard to come by. There was a fierce demand and therefore a fierce competition for barrels. And small independent companies were having a difficult time. So Owsley Brown the first, the son of our founder, George Garvin Brown, decided, well, we need to have our own cooperage if we're going to survive. And that led to the purchase of a wood-making plant in the Highland Park neighborhood of Louisville that had been making, of all things, plywood for the war effort. and it had made rifle stocks. It had been a furniture factory, and we purchased that wood making plant and converted it to a cooperage. So we were just one of many distilleries at the time that had its own cooperage. So it wasn't abnormal. It wasn't a big deal. It was sort of normal.
But it was a step.
Yeah.
It was a step
Something
toward
new.
the direction that you all became in the
Yeah.
1950s. You acquired Jack Daniels.
And then by and large, those big famous distilling companies went out of business. Their brands were broken up. Their distilleries were closed and consolidated. And little old Brown-Forman kept plugging along. And here we are now today as the only major whiskey company in the world. There are some small companies that make their own barrels, but we're talking tiny, tiny companies. But we make all of our own new barrels. And that has allowed us to expand and develop the range of Jack Daniels products, Old Forester, obviously Woodford Reserve, the unique barrels that Elizabeth told us about, King of Kentucky, Cooper's Craft. Again, it's amazing to think that we're not the biggest whiskey company in the world by any stretch of the imagination.
Well, you're the top 5.
But
you're
only,
not far off.
but only we make our own barrels. And then when those barrels are sold on the open market, because we use them only once for our products, and certainly Woodford barrels are in high demand. Double oak barrels are in super high demand on the open market from brewers, wineries, tequila producers, rum producers, and whiskey producers of any stripe. That Brown-Forman supplies annually half the used barrels to the world.
Wow.
So there's not a Scotch whiskey, there's probably not a rum, tequila, etc., that doesn't have a little Woodford Reserve Brown-Forman flavor in it years from now as they age their products. So our flavor is very much in demand.
So that's actually pretty awesome because you got some history there, and I kind of want to even bring the history up just a little bit to today as we start to kind of close this out. And Fred sort of jumped the gun a little bit because we poured some of this King of Kentucky, and Fred and myself, we were at the media gathering for it. We got to be there with you as you kind of gave us a breakdown of the history and really what this means as Brown-Forman's coming out with a new product. So I kind of want you to talk a little bit about what is, and I guess just give like a 30-second overview of like what is King of Kentucky. Most of the whiskey geeks out here already know what it is, but kind of talk about what the future of this product line is going to be as well.
Well, we want to be transparent about the King of Kentucky, and you guys remember we told everyone, we're very proud of it. This new make began as early times. It's 79% corn, 11% rye, 10% malt, early times yeast. If we bottled it at 4 years old, it would have been early times. Hold it another 10 years, it becomes something completely different. And holding a barrel that long for us, whether it's Woodford Reserve, early times, Old Forester, is extremely special because we heat cycle our warehouses. And you can virtually double the age. When Elizabeth said we're making Woodford Reserve from 5, 6, 7, 8 year barrels batched together, that's 10, 12, 14-year-old barrels based on the maturation profile. Because heat cycling is an aggressive maturation process that dates back to the 1870s. So King of Kentucky, this 14-year-old bottle, has a 28-year age persona. But it's not 28 years, of course. It's 14 years. So it is chemically, I made sure we analyzed the King, and I showed everyone the chemical signature, which is the molecular flavor structure, versus early times 4-year-old 100 proof bottle and bond, and it's completely different. So again, transparent how it was made. This is a revitalization or a return of an old label, King of Kentucky, which goes back into the 1880s.
Why did you choose this label? Because you guys have a plethora of fantastic labels, and King of Kentucky.
Why not bring
was,
back marrow? I kind of like that. That would be cool. You know,
King
bone
Kentucky's
marrow's back
way down
in. You
the
know, it's in
list.
the
Bone
new
marrow
thing.
shots. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, there's several reasons, and I'll say the most important reason is our colleague, who's a friend of ours, an executive of the company, John Hayes, said, "I like that name," and that's a good idea.
That's all you need to say. Right there.
But John was early, several years ago, an advocate of that very point, bringing back our historic names, and we do have a lot of historic names from our company. Some maybe not so cool today, like Possum Ridge. Nah, probably pass on that.
I don't know, man.
Uh-oh.
Bardstown, that might sell out.
That'd be
Old
item
Tucker,
at
and of
Toddy's.
course the ever popular Old Brown and Old Foreman. But King of Kentucky does have a fun story because it's named not after some mythical King of Kentucky. It's not named after did Elvis sleep here this weekend. It's named after the King of Kentucky, which is the sport of kings. It's named after thoroughbred horse racing because the owner of the brand back in the 1880s, John G. Roach, also was a thoroughbred breeder. So King really ties into our Woodford Reserve story in one way that it's involved or recognizes the importance of horse racing in Kentucky.
I still vote for Marrow. If we can get a Marrow bottle, I'm all over it.
Kenny, if I may, if we have more time, if we have a little bit of time.
Do 2 minutes. 2 minutes.
Elizabeth, as soon as this came out, as you know, my background, I wrote the book, Whiskey Women. Immediately, women wrote me and said, "Why the king?"
Oh gosh.
Yeah. There was a little bit of that.
Yeah.
And
Oh boy.
Because it's a historical brand.
Oh, boy.
It
Here we
was
go.
King of Kentucky.
but
Eggshells. Where's the eggshells?
The Queen of Kentucky.
historical
closing my
reasons
ears.
don't matter today.
Yeah.
As you know,
Yeah, people care about that it was more like, why is it the king? Well, we can come out with the Queen of Kentucky. Katie and I can work on that.
You better file it now
Ladies.
and register before somebody else
So
takes it.
TTB, here we come. Here comes the Queen of Kentucky.
Yeah,
just
you know,
texted my
hey,
guy.
maybe we'll get all the ladies of Brown Foreman together and we'll come out with the Queen.
I implore that, and then I would actually say that Brown Foreman, Kenny, has been one of the great companies for pushing forward women.
Yeah, if anything, Brown Foreman's a company that really highlights women and
Celebrates
and has them.
women,
Celebrates.
I would
That's,
even
thank
say.
you. That's the word I was going for.
And-
Celebrate it.
Well,
And it's very difficult to. When I was researching this, 5 years, actually it's 10 years ago now, I was researching Whiskey Women.
Mm-hmm.
None of the brands were like, no, we don't have any women, and I would have to seek them out. But Brown Foreman was like, here's a list of our women. They were very helpful. Lynn Tolley, Peggy
Yeah.
No Stevens.
Yeah.
Lynn
A
Tolley.
lot of these great women, Brown Foreman was very excited to share them with me.
Well, if I may, Fred, and I'm saying this quite proudly, Elizabeth and Katie aren't where they are because they're women. They're great at what they do. They're professionals. They're experts. They happen to be women, just like you and I happen to be men. But they're experts and highly qualified at what they do. So they just happen to be who they are, and that's what we need to celebrate and recognize.
And then that's part of it, right? It's not a matter of just giving people roles because of their gender or race or whatever. It's a matter of doing it because they deserve it.
yes.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's so white guy doesn't dismiss them. I think that's what we have to work on. Is like Chris, you come from a time in the distilling business where people were dismissing people
Oh yeah.
just because they were women.
No.
And I think that's where we have to get is we ignore we move past that.
I look forward to the point when it's no longer, so you're a woman in this industry, tell me about that. That's the question I get all the time, and it's like, how about I'm just a person in this industry? But it's going to take us a while to get there, and I've recognized the fact that I am a woman in the industry, and that's a significant difference.
And I will tell you everything that I do, like with my Bourbon and Beyond programming and the Hometown Rising, and I try to include people without saying oh, hey, look, it's a woman.
Yeah.
Oh, hi, look, it's an African American person.
Yeah.
I don't want
Yeah.
that. I want to include them as if they're
Good.
supposed to be there.
Yeah.
But
there is significance in us being there because we are at a turn of times. You know, time is changing, and there was once a time when that wasn't the case. So we do need to celebrate and acknowledge that. But I do look forward to the next generation where it's just the norm, you know?
Yeah. But let's don't forget, I know we're very proud that Elizabeth's mother worked at Seagram's and my mother worked at Brown-Forman. So we had mentors or inspiration from our own mothers in the industry. They just weren't up in front of people like we're able to be today.
They weren't on podcasts?
no, bourbon has always been
Weird. How
in
weird.
Chris's blood. This is true, though, actually.
Yeah. I got a question kind of as we wrap things up, too. So, like, I envision this, like, transition.
Why wrap things up, though? We're having a great time.
I guess we don't have to wrap things... Well, not wrapping things up, I have a question. So, like, I kind of envision this, like Chris is Coach Cal, or, you know, like a legendary coach, like somebody that you never want to be the person that follows the legend or whatever.
I'm Scotty Davenport.
Yeah, exactly. So, like, talk about that, and, like, is there any pressure or, like, sense of, like, okay, you know, this is Chris, and I gotta, you know, replace the great legend, and how difficult is that, or does that wear on you at all?
That's a really good question. And actually, when I first started training under Chris, I talked with one of our executives within kind of R&D, and I had this conversation. I was like, he's Chris Morris. Like, I will never be Chris Morris. I won't ever have the same derived passion. Like, his extensive history knowledge is so much more. I love history, but his knowledge is so much. It's just we're different people. And I also was like, he knows so much, and I can't possibly. And it's like, he said to me, he goes, you know, Elizabeth, do you think Chris Morris, you know, he's been in the industry, well, now going on 40 plus years, but at the you know, he's like, when he first started out, do you think he knew all the things he knows? And I was like, you're right. I don't think he did. So it gave me the courage to know I have a lot to learn, and that's why I take a lot of pride in the fact of the assistant piece, and I still have so much to learn. 40 plus years in the industry. I hope to be where he is one day in 40
Have you reached
plus years.
a level where you
But
can
I
yell
think-
at him like he did at Lincoln?
But Chris,
you know,
do-
where you're
do
like,
you-
nope, you don't got any more, Chris.
I mean, I'll tell it. I give him my honest opinion. You know, I'm not like afraid to be like Chris.
She smacks
I
me
don't know.
around sometimes.
Yeah, I hear you.
We have a good. We work well together.
Chris,
and, you know, it's fun. It's an interesting age gap too.
I'm fascinated by this because, like, Chris did not come up the same route as you.
Yeah.
He was with a very popular company called United Distillers, now known as Diageo, and he had several different titles there. Then he went to Glenmore and then Brown-Forman, or I may have that mixed up a little bit in the timeline of the Chris Morris biography, but he's not always been with Brown-Forman, so he's kind of like
He's gotten
brought
around
himself
and played
up the
the field
bootstraps
a little bit in the bourbon industry.
Like, when you got the term master distiller associated to your name, Chris, I'm curious, did you feel comfortable with it?
Well, so very briefly, I started at Brown-Forman in 1976, working with Lincoln. Left the company in 86. Went to Glenmore. Glenmore was acquired by United Distillers.
Can you tell us a story about how you left Brown-Forman? Because I love this story. I love this
I
story.
don't know if anyone loves it.
All right, pass me more King Kentucky.
This is good
I'm going
stuff.
to join Fred in his cot.
Well, I'm able to say it now. It was quite traumatic and painful. The bourbon industry was in free fall. You can't imagine today what it was like. The Brown-Forman distilleries were closed 9 months a year, operating 3 months a year. The cooperage was shut down. Brown-Forman was buying companies like Hartman Luggage and Lennox Crystal and Gore and China and Care Sharif flatware, diversifying because bourbon and whiskey were dying. And the company had to cut back on its work staff, and it cut back on its production work staff. If your distillery's closed 9 months a year, you don't need everybody. And a group of us young supervisors were let go. I'd like to say not for performance, but we just had to be let go. Unfortunately, one individual, Buddy Thompson, bless his heart, who I'm
Buddy.
so close to, Buddy Thompson was expanding Glenmore, and I was hired at Glenmore, which was just awesome and a great experience. And the United Distillers bought Glenmore because Glenmore was doing so well, and off we go. But when I left United Distillers in '97, as I returned to Brown-Forman, I can't remember exactly how long, but I was the newly minted master distiller for United Distillers. Nobody knows that. We don't talk about it. Ed Foote was bourbon. Sitzel Weller. Dave Backus had been George Dickel, and I became the master distiller for United Distillers. And so coming back to Brown-Forman, I had to sort of start all over again to be trained in the Brown-Forman way, which was cool. But I was very comfortable with the title because I'd already gotten it at United Distillers. And who doesn't have a master distiller any longer? Who doesn't exist because it's part of Diageo.
You're
and all
glad
that.
they didn't have criteria back then for master
There was no
distiller?
criteria. So as life presents itself, you just go with the flow, and that's what was going on. So it was if you visit my office at Brown-Forman, you'll see my business cards. I have them framed. Master Distiller, I.W. Harper. Master Distiller, George Dickel. Brands that you don't want to buy today, because I'm no longer there. But
I was like, ooh, shots fired. Shots fired.
it was a great experience. It was an awesome experience. But it helped develop me for my current position, and I'm able to pass along those learnings to Elizabeth and to Katie and others. So our life is a set of experiences that you need to hopefully benefit from, and I sure did.
This has been great because we've now taken it back from where we started, asking what is the master distiller to you, and then going all the way to really how you got to where you are today, and it's the whole evolution of the journey. And so it's been a real pleasure to have both of you on today because we got a lot of insight into the distilling techniques. We've got the master distiller, we got the assistant master distiller. If they open up a job description or a job opening, you can be assistant to the master distiller or assistant to the assistant.
This would be a great time to ask them if we could do a pursuit series with them.
One of these days.
Let us do our own barrel with them.
One of these days.
Yeah.
But
can
I
come out and do
abstain from
personal
that. I'm not a
selection.
part of that.
Exactly.
But, I want to say thank you again for coming on the show today. It was a pleasure. And thank you also to Down One Bourbon Bar for hosting us here today.
Yeah, this is
has
a great
been
event.
awesome. It's been a great,
Whoop, whoop.
great avenue.
I bet the Blake Shelton people love us.
Oh,
I know.
yeah, absolutely.
Blake Shelton's tonight.
I know. We're the real show.
Right across the street. But again, thank you all so much. And if I know that you're on Instagram, so if people want to follow you, how do they get a hold of you, or how can they kind of see what you're up to in your daily life?
Gosh, it's Elizabeth _O'Neill_McCall.
Hashtag blessed.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you
Chris,
all so much.
you don't have an Instagram account?
Chris doesn't do social
Where's your
media.
social? Where's your social
He
follow?
relies on me. I had to
I'll come over and I'll hook you up, okay?
I've known Chris for a long time. It's probably best he's not on social media.
I'll tell you my telegraph address at some point.
Your Morse code,
There it is.
I'll tap 2 dots, 1-3. No, I'm kidding.
Although I think you would really be good on social media because you don't mind getting in the muck with people. You don't like telling someone
just
they
don't
suck.
do it after midnight,
That's why I'm not on social media.
Yeah.
Just keeps himself out.
I honestly, like Ryan, Kenny, that's why I have a great respect for Chris, is I've asked him questions over the years of numerous people or whatever, and he will tell you, like, they suck, they're great, this is why they're this, or that's why that is no good. I mean, he gives you the honest opinion. And you can find that, like, in people who are, brave enough to quote Chris at times.
Well, next time we're gonna make a list.
Please don't tell me I suck. I have a really bad.
He's told me I suck
sensitive.
before, so, like, I've quoted that.
Well,
I kid. He
like I
actually
said,
never.
next time we're gonna get this list, and he's gonna go over who sucks and who doesn't. But
Is Chris
again,
comfortable?
Well,
We-
no. Our other Chris Pointer, is over
won't
here
let him.
looking at us, and I don't think we're going to do that.
No.
Probably not.
Is he a PR guy?
Easy.
He's like, get off, get off.
he's the PR guy.
Cut the
of,
mic, cut the mic.
Brown Foreman.
All right, so let's go ahead. Let's wrap this up. Thank you all once again.
Thank you.
And thank you once again to Down One Bourbon Bar
Yeah.
for hosting us today. You make sure you follow not only us, Bourbon Pursuit, at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, as well as Fred Minnick on all those channels, but also follow Down One Bourbon Bar. Support us on Patreon, and yeah, wrap it up.
I can't wait to sit up straight. I've been hunching over, like, because Kenny's like, gotta talk in the mic, but
That's why I grabbed the mic.
I know, smart. Kenny doesn't let me. Fred, you're like a acclaimed writer, so you get to do whatever you want. So, but anyways, thanks to Down One. This is awesome. Like, huge, like, step up for us. I mean, this is really cool.
You know,
very
I'll say
humbled
this:
to be here.
it's because the podcast has earned it. You know, I just want to say this straight up. It's like what you two all have done in the last few years has been remarkable. It's been a real pleasure for me to join it. And,
Thanks, Fred.
And I got to tell you, like,
I was afraid Chris was going to tell us to suck, and now you're pumping me up.
We're going to take you off our suck list. Yeah.
I'll just say that, like, I can't think of a better two guests to like start our live.
Oh yeah, this was. I was surprised they said yes. I was
Elizabeth
like,
is
all right.
amazing, but Chris, I don't care what you say about him. Chris is one of my mentors in life.
Thank you.
Not just bourbon, but you're a friend to me, and you are a mentor in life as well as whiskey. And I've spent a lot of time with you in a lot of different places, and my respect for you is through the roof. So
Thank you, Fred.
I'm thankful that you came on to be with us in our first segment.
No.
Oh yeah.
For live.
We're honored, Elizabeth and I, definitely to be your first guest on this new format. That is truly an honor, and we appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing you all again in the future. And obviously, you're always welcome to visit us at Woodford Reserve. And
We'll take you up on it.
Let's do a personal selection. Let's get it going. Come
Let's
on.
do it.
All
Hey,
right.
We're in.
Hey, be careful. I'll show up tomorrow like Kramer. I'll pop in like I'm here.
Katie's working tomorrow.
Yeah.
We're off.
You made like a 2-second mention of that, and Chris clued onto it.
I know. I had to sneak it in. I had motive. Sorry, but no. Thanks, guys, for spending your Friday evening with us, and thanks to everyone that tuned in. Really appreciate it. Thanks to Down One, and we'll see you next time.